This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by Shark Coatings. Visit sharkfloorcoatings.com when you need professional floor coating services done right the first time.
Want more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown. Because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you Halloween night, and we weren't sure when we were going to get to this. Will and I both have kids. Will's doing more than one than I am. It's easy for me. It's not so much easy for Will. So we weren't sure what our schedules were going to be here on Halloween night, but we are here at our normal 8:30 start right here on Halloween night. Will, I hope you and the kids had a good Halloween.
Well, put it this way. I am completely soaked here for Gators Breakdown, sitting here in wet clothes because it was a wet Halloween up here in Pennsylvania. But that's better than some Halloweens where it's like 40 degrees and the kids are just complaining the whole time. There's way too much candy in the house. So people at work should be pleased because they're going to get like bags and bags and bags of this stuff to get it out of the house like that. But good time had by all. And, fun time for everybody to dress up. Had one of the guys, the little guy was in an alligator uniform with a little Gator logo on it. So still repping the logo up here in PA.
There we go. Yeah. So fun time had here. I was not rained on. We were joking before. I was in short sleeves and shorts and flip-flops for Halloween. So, as you never know what you're getting this time of year temperature-wise in Northeast Florida, but it was one hot Halloween this time. So, as you said, most of the candy's going to work too. Too much of it. I'm tired of seeing candy right now. So,
well, besides, this is beer season with all the tail canning, so the candy doesn't work, especially after some of the drinks we had to have on Saturday after that game against Georgia,
and before the game.
Pre-game for the misery.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, world's largest outdoor cocktail party lives up to it. So, always a fun time in Jacksonville for Florida, Georgia too. At least before the game. Yeah, game didn't go so much. We won't concentrate. I'll get Will's thoughts if you haven't been at Reading Reaction or what those guys are doing on YouTube. Of course, that'll kind of bleed into some of the conversation we're going to have too. Of course, some newsy information. Newsy Monday here for the Gators with the, of course, announcement of Brenton Cox being dismissed from the team. We'll get into that, and then kind of an outlook for the rest of the season as well. We'll also hit the Keon Zipperer news too that came out, but it's kind of been retracted everywhere. We'll discuss it because it is out there. I'm being told it's still going to happen, but it looks like Keon Zipperer, tight end for the Gators, will be out for the rest of the season as well. I'm sure Billy Napier will go into that more on Wednesday when he talks about injuries more on Wednesday than he does on Monday. So plenty to get into, Will, with this episode of Gators Breakdown. But your quick takeaway from the 42-20 defeat at the hands of Georgia.
I mean, I think it was exactly what both of us expected, right? I think you had 41-20 and I had like 38-17 or something like that as the scores. And, it was Florida put up a game fight there in the third quarter, but they're just way too inconsistent in order to be able to take on an opponent who is not inconsistent at all. And I mean, Georgia didn't play a good game, right? I mean, we sort of looked at it and said, I think before the game said Florida's only shot was if Georgia turns the ball over 3 or 4 times, Florida doesn't turn the ball over at all. And then Florida's able to take advantage of it. And that was really the story, is that Florida took advantage of a couple of the turnovers, but couldn't take over all of them. They got the fumble there after the touchdown to open up the third quarter, and they weren't able to convert that into a touchdown. They end up settling for a field goal. They get the long throw to Henderson to come within one score, and then immediately let Georgia go down the field. And it was like 6 plays with like 3 explosives, go down the field and turn it into a 2-score game again. They're just not consistent enough. And that's both the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. But, I think we sort of thought that the offense was taking some step forward against Tennessee and Eastern Washington, and some of the ugly things that we've seen early in the season, not all of them, but some of the ugly things have started to rear their ugly head. And I think, look, last year's team was 6-7. There's a reason they were 6-7. And, some of the guys who were really good actually left that team. So Elam and Zach Carter and guys like that. And, no one's really stepped up into those spaces. And so, you get what you get, right? You get the inconsistency from last year with a new system and a new coaching staff, and not everything has been fixed, certainly, and it's frustrating sometimes. But I think as well, it's a sign that changes need to come, and certainly there are some changes today, and we'll talk about those.
Absolutely, and we'll get into kind of similar to extend that conversation, as I said, an outlook for the rest of the season. 4 winnable games, Will, for the Gators left on the season, 4 losable games for the Gators the rest of this season, the last month of the season. So plenty to get into in that regard. Perfect time as we turn the calendar from October to November. Before we get there, hit that like button. If you're watching this live on YouTube right now, even if you're not watching this live, you go and watch the replay, hit that like button, really helps us out. Doesn't cost a thing. Hit that like button. It goes a long way on the YouTube version of things. Subscribe as well. You'll get those notifications. If you believe you hit that bell notification, you'll get a alert when Gators Breakdown goes live. And also, Gators Breakdown Plus, a lot of good conversation on the Discord server the last couple of days with recruiting news and just football news and of course, all the news today with Brenton Cox and Keon Zipperer out there. So all the discussion kind of going on right there live and very, very active on the Gators Breakdown Plus Discord. You can sign up for Gators Breakdown Plus with the link in the description. So, all right. Well, every Monday, of course, Billy Napier meets with the media, and it was about 30 minutes before he met with the media that Zach Alberverdi from On3 tweets and puts out there that Brenton Cox had been dismissed from the team. So let's hear from Billy Napier on the Brenton Cox dismissal.
Brenton, we've kind of decided to move on here. I think, I think that being a football player at the University of Florida is a privilege, right? And there's certain expectations and standards that come with that. Brenton's been here in his 3rd year. Obviously, he's done a lot of good things for the University of Florida, and we wish him nothing but the best. But sometimes you have to make decisions in the best interest of the team, and certainly Brenton, we're going to do everything we can do to help him with his transition. But as simple as that, I think that we've decided to move on. We've been playing a handful of players in that position the entire year. I think so. AP and Lloyd and those guys will do a really good job. They've been playing in each and every game for the most part. I know Lloyd was out this past week, but we'll just continue in that direction.
Just Billy Napier's thoughts, and then Will, about 30 minutes to about an hour before we came live here, Brenton Cox tweets, not necessarily his response, but kind of a response, but his thoughts on being dismissed from the University of Florida. First, Brenton Cox says, "First, I would like to thank God for the blessings and the opportunities that he has allowed me to experience throughout my life, and especially in my football career. I would not be the man I am today without the constant support of my family and the community of people that surround me. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Florida Gators football program, fans, and my teammates. This football program has helped me to be a productive and positive student athlete on and off the field, and I will be forever grateful for that. Being a part of this program and having the ability to wear the number 1 jersey was an honor and privilege. I find it hard to express my disappointment in being dismissed from the team. It is truly a shock. I have always had a competitive spirit. I think sometimes that gets misconstrued. SEC football is a serious endeavor. There is a lot at stake for everyone involved. As I lead the program, I want the Gator faithful to know my goal every Saturday was to contribute to a winning effort, and that my mindset has always been focused on my team and teammates and making my team and teammates better. During this time, I will continue to work and have positive influences around me to prepare me for my next journey in my football career. With that being said, I am humbled and excited to announce that I will be declaring for the 2023 NFL Draft. I look forward to this next season, or this next season in my life, and the opportunity to make everyone proud in my professional football career. So thoughts from Billy Napier, thoughts from Brenton Cox. Of course, Will currently leading the Gators with 8 tackles for loss, third on the team with 2 sacks. Season opener, of course, 10 tackles against Utah, 3 of them solo, half tackle for loss, quarterback hurry. He was named SEC co-defensive lineman of the week for that performance, week 1. And look, Will, it was a player that ended last season on a high note, led the team in both sacks with 8.5, tackles for loss 14.5. 2020, he had 41 tackles, 21 solo, 9.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, in addition to leading the team with quarterback hurries that year with 18. An okay player that never came near his 5-star status coming out of high school. And that after transferring from Georgia as well. So, well, probably something we didn't expect on this Monday after the Georgia game, but a lot happening there with Billy Napier, what he had to say, and Brenton Cox today.
Yeah, I mean, Napier didn't really say a whole lot, right? He's and he's probably can't, and I'm not sure he'd want to anyway. And that was also, one of the stories coming out of there as well is some of the information that he gave or didn't give there. But look, I mean,
hot mic,
something like that. So I think there's a lot you can say about Cox. I think obviously comes in with a lot of fanfare from Georgia. Everybody gets really excited because he's a 5-star recruit from the transfer portal who makes his way into Dan Mullen's program. And everybody knew that Mullen needed to bring in higher level talent. He was able to do that. Cox really has delivered probably more than some of the other transfers that Dan Mullen brought in. If you think about Van Jefferson ends up in the NFL, he contributes quite a bit. Trevon Grimes was good, but not great. I think Cox sort of falls in that category as well. Adam Schuler falls in that category. Some of the guys who were brought in the transfer portal last year at defensive tackle, probably 2 or 3 rungs below that. So, look, I mean, Cox was a contributor to the team. You wish him well as he moves on. Never really a good fit with this defense. You could tell sort of a square peg in a round hole. And, the issues that Florida had holding the edge were not just Cox's fault, but Cox was a big part of that. And the inconsistencies that Florida showed on repeated times. I mean, the interception he could have had against Alabama last year, the pass interference call that he had right after the interception he could have had against Alabama last year, the inability to win one-on-one battles consistently. He could win them every once in a while, but couldn't win them consistently. And look, when you're the prime defensive player, you're going to get matched up against the prime offensive player in the SEC. But that's not going to get any easier in the NFL. So, like you said, I think we expected more from Cox. We kept expecting him to sort of have that breakout year. This year was and undoubtedly frustrating for him as well, right? That he's only got a couple of sacks, that he hasn't really been able to get to the quarterback as much as he might want to. And, part of that is that they've changed scheme. Part of that is dropping into coverage a lot more. And part of that is, as Napier mentioned, they're rotating more guys in. So, hey, you part ways and the defense can't get worse, right? I mean, so from the standpoint of usually somebody leaves and you go, okay, well, what does this do to the overall quality of the defense? I mean, the honest answer is that it can't get worse. And beyond that, I think from the standpoint of, is this going to get people to sort of snap to attention, maybe that, hey, the best player, or at least the perceived best player on the defensive side of the ball has been dismissed from the team, maybe. And you think about all the changes people have been clamoring for and those sorts of things. I think one of the things, there has been a constant drumbeat that Florida's defense has been underperforming its talent level, which I think is undoubtedly true. The question is that a scheme issue? Is that a player execution issue? Is that a cultural issue, or is that all three? And so we're going to get this. There's an experiment going on right now, right? I mean, someone has been dismissed from the team. You presume, reading between the lines, that is a cultural issue, right? And again, nobody's fault, just a disconnect that Brenton Cox did not commit to Billy Napier, and Billy Napier did not recruit Brenton Cox, right? And so those guys and that relationship is not something that's been built over multiple years. It's something where they've been forced into a situation together and now have been going through really, really tough times. And look, I mean, I think many times Cox has deserved the criticism that he's gotten, but this fan base can be rough on people when they're struggling. And so he hears all that. And so, that frustration, that lack of success this year, the inability to sort of put everything together, and the fact that, Cox wants to go to the NFL and get that payday. And you combine all of those things together, and it just leads to a situation like this. So again, like I said, you wish him well. But certainly you hope that this is addition by subtraction, that the young guys who get an opportunity are able to at least learn so that next year, the mistakes they would have made next year aren't going to be there. And perhaps we even find something, right? That Napier said something about in the second half, sort of figuring out who the team is by coming out and playing hard in that third quarter and performing at least in that third quarter and not giving up and not lying over. And, this is an opportunity now to have those other guys say, hey, we're going to pick it up. And from a team perspective, it's really no different than if he'd sprained a knee or sprained an ankle or something like that, right? You always expect you're going to have an injury or two throughout the year. So they should have been preparing for guys on the defensive line to go down. And this, from a logistics standpoint, is no different than if he'd gone down with an injury. Now you just hope that it adds to the cultural aspects of the team.
Yeah, Billy Napier, speaking on that part, he certainly didn't want to discuss the reasons, even though he was pressed about it. Did not want to go into the reasons, deciding to keep that in-house. And look, Chris Bogle, he transferred away before the season. That was maybe an option there. Of course, now is, as you heard Billy Napier say, Antoine Powell-Ryland, Lloyd Summerall there. But, of course, Billy Napier did not want to go into detail about what happens here. And it was either way. It was obvious Napier wasn't going to put up with it and set an example here, Will, as you said. Before, as for the replacements, Antoine Powell-Ryland, 11 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble so far this year. Of course, nothing to write home about. Same for Lloyd Summerall. Mostly been special teams this season. He's got 3 tackles, 2 solo. There's 2 solo tackles coming in the win versus Eastern Washington. So definitely still will. I think a lot of, as you talk about criticism there, and a lot of criticism out there is either, if you're not elite, well, you're terrible. Well, no, there's in between. It's not 1 or 10. There are numbers in between if you want to start rating players. And they do lose their most proven pass rusher here. He has proven that. Now he's proven that on a bad defense this year. And this year, as I said, it's not really meant a whole lot. But show the ability to be more consistent earlier this season, and that production's kind of teetered off. Of course, as you said, Will, a lot of reputation for the over pursuit, not playing assignment football at times was Brenton Cox. Showed signs late last season, like I said, but never came to fruition, never turned it around to kind of combine what we saw late last season and kind of continue that for this season. Was an okay player this season, but he was an okay player on a bad defense, kind of going to your point. So we'll just see, how much he, means to this, how much he meant to this defense in the games coming up, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, he had 2 sacks in 8 games, and he's their primetime pass rusher. And I think just as
he told us all preseason he wanted to go, hit that sack record, which was like 13 or whatever. Well, he wasn't getting anywhere close to that.
No, and again, just like Anthony Richardson is going to take criticism for the way he played in the first half in this game against Georgia, I think Brenton Cox, it's legitimate to say you are a pass rusher. You give up things to be a pass rusher. And so, the fact that you only have 2 sacks and that you're not changing the game is something that impacts the overall quality of the defense. If Brenton Cox was getting to the quarterback on a consistent basis, then Florida's defense overall would be better. And, again, that's a factual statement, right? You got 2 sacks in 8 games. It's not what you expect, especially out of a guy who had 8 sacks last year. I think like 13.5 or 14 tackles for loss. Those sorts of, he just has not been able to put up the same statistics he had last year. And he was even injured heading into last year. So we thought this year he was going to really be able to take a step forward, and just hasn't been able to do it. Now, again, he in many ways, this may be a square peg in a round hole, where Patrick Toney's defense is not Todd Grantham's defense. And Brenton Cox came to Florida to play in Todd Grantham's defense. And so you switch it, you make him go into coverage more often, and you make him do things that maybe he's not comfortable with. And look, it is what it is, right? I mean, the fit has not been great. The production has not been great, but you can kind of say that across the board for all the Florida players, except for maybe Amari Burney, who I think has shown significant improvement this year. Other than that, I mean, where is the improvement? So it's not just a Cox thing, but I think, he did. There was the video going around of him throwing a punch on a Georgia player in the actual end zone of the Georgia game, and those sorts of things. And we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but certainly Napier, it sounds like, felt like there was a need to send a message and have them part ways. And again, you wish him best. You wish him the best of luck. But I'm excited to see what the guys who are going to be in there are going to be able to do, because I think we know what Brenton Cox can do. And like you said, it's average play on a poor defense.
Yeah, just like to, see what more options Florida has. And as I said, don't have a lot. Antoine Powell Riley, we've seen him a bit. Lloyd Summerall, not much at all this season. So we'll see. Hopefully one of those guys step up. If you would think if they were going to step up, they would have gotten, as you said, more playing time this year if Brenton Cox, if the coaching staff wasn't happy with what they were getting with Brenton Cox. So up and down career, up and down year for Brenton Cox. We'll see what the Gators do in the last month of the season to replace what he brings to the table. So, all right. And then, as I mentioned, because it was out there a lot at one point, Keon Zipperer did post on social media today that he would be out for the rest of the season. Let me put that out there. And yeah, due to an injury, I will not play for the remainder of the season. Never ask why, just trust the process. See y'all next year. That was from Keon Zipperer. And then I've asked around, that still should be the case, even though that post had been taken down. And I believe it was Zach Alberverdi on that one too, who shared. He saw the same thing that we saw, and he shared. He was the first one to put it out there. And then we kind of, of course, chased down the original post, and it was there, but it all has been taken down now. So we'll see where that one goes. In asking around, I've heard that's going to be the case as well. So for Keon Zipperer, 13 catches, 177 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown, of course, versus Tennessee, it might be one of the best plays of what might be the best play of the year for the Gators through the air. Anthony Richardson finds Keon Zipperer as he's kind of maneuvering around the pocket. Zipperer catch and run, shedding tackler for a 44-yard score there for against Tennessee. So probably not used as much as I thought so far this season. Some of that due to inconsistent quarterback play. The best receiving threat from the position, of course, while playing that position along with Dante Zanders mostly. Looks like Jonathan Odom up next. Nick Elkson is pretty much dealing with a shoulder injury still. True freshman Arlis Boardingham injured as well. Doesn't leave much at the position for the Gators.
No, I mean, you had Elksness tweeting about needing to get the ball to the tight ends more often. He did post a clarifying.
He was loving the way Georgia was using their tight ends.
Yeah, something like that. Look, I mean, I think when you look at Florida's offense, and it's interesting because yes, they don't have the tight ends that you would expect in a Napier offense, but it's not as though there weren't. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised at this. It's not as though there weren't a bunch of guys running free against Georgia's secondary. Anthony Richardson just couldn't hit them. And, they've been in more three wide receiver sets. It looks like Shorter's okay. I was worried there that he might have pulled a hamstring. They've been doing a lot of that with 11 personnel where they don't necessarily always have two tight ends. And certainly Zanders has gotten run. He's going to get more. It always hurts when you lose a guy who's a big part of your offense, and Zipper's been in there a lot as a blocker. And so, I don't really know who they're going to bring in that position. And maybe they compensate by bringing in a sixth offensive lineman. Maybe they compensate by bringing in a third wide receiver. We'll have to see, right? That's going to be an adjustment that they're going to make, because Zipperer, whether he was getting the ball a lot or not, was a big part of the offense, just from the standpoint of he was in there doing a lot of the dirty work that was necessary for a team that even after the Georgia game is still ranked very, very high in terms of being able to run the ball.
Yeah, be interesting to see. I mean, look, even in the Georgia game, Richardson could have hit him in the end zone for a score. Florida ends up scoring that drive anyway, but it was still there, maybe to make a possible touchdown versus Georgia this past week. It was just just a couple of days ago. So hopefully on Wednesday we'll get some more information there. Of course, that info was out there, but you can't find it much anymore as far as the official post there from Keon Zipperer and reports that followed. So man, still excited to see him. Hopefully we get to see more of him next year, bounces back from that injury, and we get some more usage out of that tight end position. So, all right, now coming up next, of course, Gators sitting at 4-4, and we'll have an outlook there for the rest of the season, looking at the schedule and what is ahead for the Gators. But first, a message from our friends at Shark Coatings.
You know the goosebumps you get when Florida takes the field? Or when that 63-yard Hail Mary actually works? Or the thrill of a game-winning interception in the end zone? What a rush! You can experience that same rush every day at your home with Shark Coatings. We'll cover your old, ugly concrete with a beautiful industrial concrete coating and a warranty that lasts longer than most careers in professional football. So whether your garage floor is for parking, partying, or working out, Shark Coatings can transform it. And if your pool deck is starting to look like a bulldog, old, cracked, and smells like pee, Shark Coatings can transform that too. Shark Coatings is easy to clean, stain resistant, and is 100% antibacterial and antimicrobial. We're easy on the eyes and on the maintenance. Gator Nation is worldwide, and Shark Coatings is based right in the heart of it. So whether you live in Brunswick, Georgia, or Live Oak, Florida, down to Ocala, over to New Smyrna Beach, or anywhere in between, contact us for a free estimate today. Learn more at sharkfloorcoatings.com. That's sharkfloorcoatings.com.
All right, well, Gators at 4-4 after the loss to Georgia. November coming up. Texas A&M, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Florida State to end the season for the Gators. And certainly will, as kind of said earlier in the episode, 4 winnable games for the Gators, but it is not out of the question 4 losable games for the Gators. Not saying they'll lose all 4, not saying they'll win all 4, but plenty there to look at, and plenty, hopefully, we find out about these Gators in the last month of the season.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we all want to get to at least 6, right? Because you get to 6 wins, and then you get the bowl practices. You get to see who wants to stick through that. I think if you're going to have guys transfer out, that'll probably happen in right after the game against Florida State. You'll have guys transfer out who maybe aren't necessarily completely bought in. And so the bowl game will give you an opportunity. So you need to get at least 2. I think we pencil in the Vanderbilt win, hopefully as a win. But then, like you said, A&M, South Carolina, Florida State, those are games that aren't necessarily – I mean, we might have thought they were on the win side of the spectrum when the season started. And given the inconsistency that this team has shown, I think, you can't ever take any of them for granted. But again, inconsistency runs both ways, right? And I think that's one of the things we need to keep in mind is that inconsistency means that, okay, you can't put together a full game against Georgia, but that also means you can put up 17 points in the third quarter against a team that hasn't given up much of anything all year long. And so if that team, the team that showed up in the third quarter, that amount of heart, that amount of urgency, that amount of want to shows up against a team like Florida State, I think Florida State's going to be in trouble. I think this team is talented enough to be able to do that. But if the team that showed up in the first half, or really the first quarter, that had like 16 total yards of offense and just 3 and out, couldn't run the ball, couldn't hit open receivers, really couldn't do anything of any sort of quality. If that team shows up, then they can lose to all 4 of these. And that's part of, I guess, what makes it fun is that we're going to get to watch it and not know who's showing up that day. And even in this case, I mean, it's interesting. The first half against Georgia, Anthony Richardson was really bad. 15 attempts, 75 yards, 3 rushes for -6 yards. Second half, 22 attempts for 196 yards, 8 rushes for 25 yards. The offense really looked different on that opening drive of the second half when they allowed him to run a little bit. And so what's it going to look like, right? What are they going to do for each of these 4 games? Are they going to open it up? Are they going to say, to heck with it? If Richardson gets injured, we'll have Jack Miller in there. We'll get to see what he can do, or Jalen Kitna and see what he can do. Are they going to sort of unleash the shackles on Lorenzo Lingard? Like, what are the things that they're going to do as they move forward to give them an advantage in these games? I did actually wonder as I was watching, it didn't look like they had a whole lot of offensive wrinkles in the game at all against Georgia. And in some ways, I wonder whether, and this is a 4D chess thing that I'm probably going to regret saying, but the idea of, if you already thought that it was a lost cause to break out things that are sort of a surprise, the new stuff against Georgia, is that stuff still coming, right? Did they make adjustments in the bye week that they will bring to the table against a South Carolina, against a Florida State, against a Texas A&M, that they didn't bring out against Georgia? Just because the way that game went, I was 28-3 in a flash, right? And so, did you really have an opportunity to run a trick play, to run some sort of reverse, to run something with a whole bunch of misdirection? Or do you just say, no, we got to get back to our main offense and start executing? And, next week, if they have an opportunity, if they're ahead, if it's a close game, something like that, do they have something sort of in the bag that they had planned for Georgia and just weren't able to bring out?
Yeah, I have brought that up too. Like, if there was going to be some adjustments in the bye week, things you needed to improve on, maybe they did, would you even really be able to tell versus Georgia if Georgia was playing good? And of course, they were playing good on defense. We kind of expected that. And maybe the same thing for the Georgia offense versus this Gator defense. I mean, they did play more man. I think we saw it. They did play a little more aggressive on the back end, and that did produce some turnovers there for the Gators. So schedule eases up. We'll get into that too. Got some good looks at just kind of a general look at where these teams are that Florida faces in the next month. But let's hear from Billy Napier on the outlook as we go to November.
I think this is more about just this team still searching for their best, right? I mean, I still think that we've got a lot of individual players that are growing, that are improving. We have certain position groups, units on our team. I think it's more about, finding a way to win a game 1 week at a time to create some momentum. There's only one way to do that. You do that one day at a time. You do that one task at a time, right? With a great focus. You try to do your best for the people around you, and I think that's what this group's going to do. I think it's one of the benefits of going to a bowl game is that you get additional time with the players from a development standpoint. More meetings, more walkthroughs, more practice opportunity. There's no question this is a developmental game, and you do that in a practice setting. It's another opportunity for your team to compete and play, right? So more experience for players, more, opportunities for players to increase their value relative to their career, and certainly an opportunity to celebrate some of the positive things that come from the year.
Time for just a few more guys.
How difficult has this SEC schedule been thus far? I mean, if you just look at it purely on paper, the next few games, the records aren't quite. I mean, you played some heavyweights so far. How difficult has this stretch been?
I mean, I think it's exactly what we signed up for. It's what we expected. I think we've got a pulse of where we're at and what we need to do going forward. But I think we've also been in the game with all these teams as well. Late in the second half. So, I mean, it is what it is. I think that gives us a good barometer of where we're at and what we need to do to position ourselves in the future, to have better success.
Yeah, well, certainly not an easy schedule for the Gators so far. I've played, hey, look, Georgia and Tennessee are playing this week. They're the number 1, number 2 teams in the country as far as play. Both of them, LSU, of course, ranked as well. Utah, it has not been, Kentucky there as well. Not been an easy schedule in Billy Napier's first season and all the transition going on. But, that doesn't mean a whole lot in these next 4 games. These are games, as I said, that are winnable. You got to go look improved. Make this tough schedule you've played up to this point pay off. If you've learned a lot from it, we need to go out there and see some progress on the field coming up in these 4 games here. So we'll send this to you earlier today so we could get a better look at it. And rest of 2022 right here and looking at some general stats for the Gators' remaining schedule using teamrankings.com like that. They only use some stats here that involve 2 FBS games, stole away to cupcake games. Though Gators haven't really had much of a cupcake game this year too much. Eastern Washington, yes, and those stats are thrown out here. But if you're looking at it, of course, Gators sitting at 4-4, playing 3-5 Texas A&M, 5-3 South Carolina coming up, 3-5 Vanderbilt, and 5-3 FSU. You start taking a look at the statistics, Will, and the first thing that caught my eye, if you go to the defensive side for the opponents coming up, well, not a lot of them are good in defending the rush. Texas A&M ranked 125th in the country in stopping the run, giving up 220 yards. South Carolina, 95th in the country in giving up 171.9 rushing yards. Vanderbilt improved there, but still 71st in the country, giving up 153 yards in a game, rushing the ball. FSU right there with Vanderbilt giving up 153 yards as well on the ground. So, Will, for all the growth we want to see from Anthony Richardson coming up in these 4 games, well, we might see it because the Florida ground game might get going, or might show what they've shown, but on a more consistent basis in the last month of the season. So that can help your quarterback. But you also look at that, some pretty good pass defenses there too. But for what we know Billy Napier likes to do, and what we have seen from this Gator offense this year, running the ball probably will be the reason Florida wins some of these games coming up in November.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's no doubt that Florida has an easier schedule coming up here in November than they have earlier in the year. You look at the SEC, there's really sort of 3 tiers. You've got the Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama tier up there at the top.
Yeah.
Then you got Ole Miss, LSU, and potentially Mississippi State. And then you have a grouping of Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, Arkansas, Missouri, Vanderbilt, Auburn, and Texas A&M, all sort of in an area. And each of those teams has strengths and weaknesses. Vanderbilt's probably the only one that is weak in both areas. And that's kind of what you see here when you look at these overall numbers. Again, you look at South Carolina, hey, their total defense 63rd, their total offense 98th in terms of yardage. Vanderbilt's the only one that's in the hundreds in both of those. So that's the one that you say is a sure thing. That's the one you have to get, right? If Billy Napier loses to Vanderbilt, he's going to have some real problems, not just with the fan base that wants guys like Patrick Toney out, but losing to Vanderbilt is that'd be an issue, right? Then you've got the game against your rival, obviously FSU. That's the important one. Florida State's actually been a lot better this year than I think we sort of thought. That opening win against LSU looks a lot better now, even though they tried to just hand it over. Norvell, I'm still not quite sure how they lost the game to NC State. So it's probably going to be a close game, but I think you'd probably have to give Florida State the edge in that one right now, especially because if you look at, so one of the things I like looking at is predicted points added, which is an EPA based stat, and you take the offense minus the defense, and they end up, if you do that, you take the offense minus defense and compare the difference, they end up in the Ole Miss, LSU, kind of Mississippi State area. So they're sort of one layer up compared to where Florida sits in the SEC. But you look at A&M, from a PPA perspective, they're worse than Florida. You look at South Carolina, they're essentially equal. They're obviously 5-3, but they've got a couple of 1-score wins that Florida doesn't have. And then Vanderbilt is very, very low on the totem pole. So, look, I'm expecting a win over Vanderbilt. I think A&M, the wild card there is Connor Wegman, right? I mean, he started a true freshman quarterback. This was always sort of the danger, is if you got Haynes King or you got Max Johnson, you kind of knew what you were getting. Connor Wegman, you don't necessarily know what you're getting, and he just had a first start where he threw for over 300 yards. Is that the start? I wasn't like crazy impressed.
Well, at least we're not playing Max Johnson.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I'd like the Jimbo Fisher version of Max Johnson, but look, I mean, Florida. Here's the problem, Dave, is that Florida's defense is going to make everybody look like a star right now, the way they've played.
Okay, well there you go. That's where I wanted to go next. Texas A&M, scoring offense 99th in the country, 103rd in total offense. South Carolina 69th in scoring offense, 98th in total offense. Vanderbilt 84th in scoring offense, 109th in total offense. FSU, as you said, improved 48th in scoring offense, 21st in total offense. So if you do look, Will, it may be where you were going with this, Florida's defense maybe catches a break here compared to the rest of the schedule as well, but this is going to be a bunch of bad offenses versus a bad defense.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something where when we played Missouri, who's down in that same general area of offenses, Florida was able to stop them at least somewhat. Not great, but able to stop them somewhat. That's what I think you're going to see against teams like A&M, South Carolina, and to a little bit lesser extent Vanderbilt. But, Florida State's got pretty good defense, so I think they'll probably have an edge, and their offense isn't terrible. So, look, I think against A&M, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt, Florida's going to have an opportunity to get off the field. Are they going to be able to do it consistently, or are they going to turn, a couple of years ago in 2020, I went into that game thinking Kellen Mond is just not very good. And all of a sudden he looks like Heisman Trophy winner Kellen Mond. And then the next week he looks like a terrible quarterback again. And, Florida's defense was able to prop him up.
He owes Todd Grantham his NFL signing bonus if he got one.
Well, so Yes, that is sort of where I was going in terms of that the defense is going to get a little bit of a respite, but this is one of those things where the narrative actually is going to be really interesting, right? Because with Cox's dismissal, if all of a sudden the defense starts playing well, we're not necessarily going to know whether it was a cultural change that caused that to happen, or whether it was a guy stepping up in Cox's stead, or whether it's just all of a sudden they started playing against teams that weren't Georgia and Tennessee. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit of both. The issue is really, if you look at it from a yards per play perspective, Florida is in the top 25 or top 30 overall from an offensive perspective. But like you said, like you've got on this graphic, they're 71st in points per game. And there's a disconnect between the way they've been able to move the ball and their ability to put points on the board. And part of that is tied with explosives, but a big part of that is just tied with their overall inconsistency. Their success rate against Georgia, so those are plays deemed successful. So if it's first down and 10 and you get more than 5 yards, it's considered successful. Second down, I think it's if you get to like within 1 or 2 yards of a first down. And then third down or fourth down, it's if you convert it. Their success rate against Georgia, 27%. Their success rate against Kentucky, 22%. Against LSU, 39. Against Missouri, 30. And then Tennessee was the best one since Utah at 45. So they have not been consistent in terms of they are a very much feast or famine offense. And that's kind of a good thing when you look at some of these defenses they're playing against, but it also might be a bad thing because if you don't hit those big plays, they don't have 17 or 14 play drives going down the field, gaining 5, 6, 7 yards at a time. It's not a coincidence that Florida wound up in third and long a ton against Georgia. Part of that is Georgia's defense, but part of that is that's just the way Florida's offense has been all year. Anthony Richardson has had to deal with 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 all year long. And he is not at a point in his career yet where he is able to take those and consistently convert them over and over and over again. And by the time he finally started converting them, and by the time they finally found some running room on the ground to help convert some of those third downs, the game was basically over the other day. So that'll be the thing that I'll look at is, can they raise that success rate? I don't know if they're ever going to be, a 60% success rate team, but the SEC average is probably, I think, somewhere around 45%. So you look at that and say, get your explosives plus have a success rate that meets the SEC average, and you're going to score 35 points. If you keep your success rate in the 25 to 30% range, even with a couple of explosives, you're only going to score 24, 27 points. And if you don't get the explosives, then you're going to be down there in the 17 to 20 range. And, that's not going to be enough to win games, even against teams with anemic offenses like Texas A&M and Vanderbilt.
Yeah, well, we're going to learn a lot about this team in the next 4 games, and we've already learned a lot coming up. Before this as well, through 8 games, 4 games left, and probably still the biggest question mark, and kind of going to what you were talking about, is quarterback Anthony Richardson. And will we see any more progression, growth from the quarterback as this schedule? It certainly eases up. I mean, this is probably the easiest portion of the schedule Florida is going to have this year, and if you take a look at it, Will, Florida is 35th in rush offense and 98th in pass offense. Well, okay, it kind of does match up well, as I kind of alluded to earlier. Texas A&M, 125th in rush defense, while Florida is 35th in rush offense, and Texas A&M 11th in pass defense, while Florida is 98th in pass offense. South Carolina, 95th in rush defense, 37th in pass defense. Vanderbilt, bad both. They're 71st rush defense, 130th in pass defense. So if there's one game you want to see Anthony Richardson go off on, it is Vanderbilt. And then FSU, the 72nd rush defense and the 18th pass defense. So Florida is coming up on the schedule playing defenses that are worse stopping the run and better stopping the pass. And this Gator offense is better running the ball than they are passing the ball. So it will, based on the surface, and we just kind of previewing these 4 games moving up, as I kind of go back to earlier, Will, it does seem like, Florida, if they can run the ball, these should be some, that should lend itself to a probable victory.
Yeah, I think it's just like every game. It's going to come down to what can Anthony Richardson provide for them, and are they willing to run him in a way that opens up the offense, that they were able to get outside
he is part of that. Yeah, he is part of that running equation. I'm sitting here purely just run game, but he's a big part of that as well.
He averages 6.5 yards per rush. So he's a pretty significant part of that. And look, I think the offense opened up when they committed to him being able to run the ball. All of a sudden, it holds the linebackers a little bit. They were able to get Montrell Johnson outside. They were able to get Trevor Etienne outside on a couple of different runs that opened things up. Even on 3rd and long, they were able to get those guys out there. So his position in the running game, I think, is critical to moving the ball, and I don't think they can wait until the 3rd quarter to do that. I think they're going to have to come right out of the chute and say, look, you're going to have to run the ball a little bit. That's just the way it is right now. He's been very hit or miss. I mean, there have been games where he's been on. The Tennessee game jumps to mind. There have been games where he's been off. Certainly the Kentucky game and even the Missouri game, especially in the first half, I think really jumps to mind. And so, he hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been fantastic. His QB rating would say he's been below average. His QBR or any of the efficiency metrics would say maybe he's been a little bit above average. But he hasn't been fantastic. And I think the interesting thing about that is there are plenty of quarterbacks who have sat there and sort of been ho-hum, inconsistent over and over and over again, for the first sort of season that they're starting. And that's what I want to see. If you look at guys, even like Felipe Franks in 2018, that 5-game run they had at the end of the year, he really took a step forward. And I think was ready to start playing better. He played decently against Miami, a couple of turnovers you wouldn't want to see there. Same thing against Kentucky. Then he gets injured and Kyle Trask comes in and he loses his job. But Franks in 2018 had sort of set the stage for us to be pretty confident that he was going to be okay in 2019. Joe Burrow did the same thing in 2018, last 4 or 5 games of the year, much, much better than he was to start the year. And then obviously that carries over into 2019. I think there are lots of examples that you can go back and find, even Hendon Hooker, in terms of the way he played at the end of last year. Now, he was a much better player at Virginia Tech and certainly played better last year than Anthony Richardson has so far this year. But Hooker's taken a step forward, and I think a lot of that is the springboard of Tennessee finishing strong last year. Granted, they end up 7-6, but they finished strong last year. Hooker's playing well. All of a sudden, they have the whole offseason where he's the starter, the undisputed starter with years of experience under his belt. They're able to build into what they've got this year. So there's an opportunity here for Billy Napier to really sort of see what Anthony Richardson can do and see how consistent he can be at running plays, where Florida, quite honestly, should be gifted enough to be able to run what they want to run against these defenses that are not great and say, look, we're going to run our best and you're going to know it's coming, but we're going to run our best and we think our best can beat your best. And we're going to go after you that way. Can't do that against Georgia. If you try that against Georgia, you're going to lose, but against Texas A&M and even more so against South Carolina and Vanderbilt, I think there is an opportunity to go out there and basically say, we're going to execute what we want to execute. Let's see how well Anthony Richardson can do that. And let's really get him prepared for 2023, which, let's be honest, was always the target. If you had him around in 2023, you bring in the recruits from this year, guys like McClellan, who are really starting to play well there on the defensive line. And then you bring in this new recruiting class and say, let's see what we got. Let's get the young guys out there and let's see if Anthony Richardson can carry us. So he's shown so far, that's the good news, is he's shown so far he can carry Florida in spurts. The question is going to be, can he carry Florida for an entire game? And then it's going to be, can he carry them for an entire multi-game stretch? And then it's going to be, can he carry them for an entire year? Those are the questions we're sort of looking at. He can carry them for stretches. He just can't carry them all the time. And when he's not carrying them, the offense is anemic. It's not like he's consistent and then he carries them. It's he carries them or he's an actual net negative. And so in many ways, it's just leveling out, making the easy plays, making sure that he's not a net negative. Like the play that jumps to mind is the 3rd down where he missed Shorter on a high throw. Should Shorter have caught the ball? Maybe. If he'd have hit him right in the chest, would it have been a 1st down? Absolutely. And so those sorts of things, I think, are the things you should be looking for. Like, honestly, if he hits a couple of long throws, you're like, hey, that's great. That's not what I want to see. I know he can do that. The question is when he's got a guy streaking across the middle and he's got to throw it over a linebacker and under a safety, is he able to start to put the touch on the ball to be able to do that? If he can, then that's a good sign that Florida's going to have more success with Richardson next year. If he continues to struggle, look, that's just going to happen sometimes, right? I mean, there are guys who are not able to develop that and take that next step. Hopefully that's not Richardson, but we should start to figure that out these last 4 games.
Absolutely. And there's kind of going back to one of my previous points. I'm not saying Florida figured some things out during the bye week, but if they did, Georgia certainly was not the opponent that you may see that against. So these 4 games, I think, will really come into play there if the Gators are going to figure some things out along the way and maybe figure some things out during the bye week as well. I don't know, but I do think if it is there, these next 4 games will tell us that. Will, one last thing I want to take a look at here as we preview those last months of the season. I mean, maybe the biggest takeaway is now I know they play in the ACC, but just based off these stats, FSU is clearly the better team out of the remaining 4. Texas A&M the most talented. Florida State, just going by pure stats, better. They're 29th in total defense if you go to that side of the ball. But if you look at their offense, they're 23rd in the country in passing offense, 284 yards a game. And in total offense as well, 465.6. That's good for 21st in the country. As you mentioned, they did have the win versus LSU. Now, both teams are so much different now, a season opener, but you give FSU the credit there. But as you said, as we previewed the season, I said coming into this season, well, you got to win the final 3 games. Remember, I said you've got to beat South Carolina, you've got to beat Vanderbilt, and you got to beat Florida State. Now, I still think that, but now if I had to revise it, I'll say, well, you have to beat Texas A&M, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt, and now the FSU game is more in question than the Texas A&M game as it was coming into the season.
Yeah, look, I think you need to win 2 of the last 4. I think that's really if you're looking at it, you got to end up 6-6, and how you get there and how you scratch and claw there, I don't know necessarily matters. But you can't be 5-7 missing a bowl game and licking your wounds heading into early signing day and all that sort of stuff. I just don't think that's going to fly with the fan base. Who you lose to is important, though, right? I mean, if you beat Texas A&M and then you drop one, and you beat South Carolina, then you drop one to Vanderbilt and Florida State. I mean, look, I get it. You beat Texas A&M, woohoo! But that's not going to do you a whole lot of good when it comes to this fan base. Now, if you end up running the table and you end up 4-4 in the SEC and 8-4 overall, then you're looking at it saying, hey, this is a pretty successful season, given that at 8 games, that's kind of what we thought coming in. I think some people had them at 9, some people had them at 7. Worst case scenario, we sort of looked at it and said it'll be 6-6, and that's still sort of where you're at. I think Florida is going to be a definitive favorite against Vanderbilt. I think they're going to be a favorite against A&M, though it'll be close. I think South Carolina, maybe that'll be a pick 'em. If you think about it, I think South Carolina is a little bit better, but Florida is at home for that one. So that'll probably be a pick 'em. And I think they'll be an underdog to Florida State in Tallahassee. And, Florida State's been playing pretty well. Now, the one thing is, in all these stats that we're showing, and this is something that I'm trying to get better at, but one of the things that we need to look at is that the stats we're showing are not opponent adjusted. And that is an important distinction when we compare Florida to Florida State. So,
that's why I had to make sure I started that with, yes, they play in the ACC.
That's the thing, right? Is that they have played Clemson and they got blown out of the water by Clemson. They played Wake Forest, and that one was reasonably close to Wake Forest. Had that one pretty much throughout. They lose to NC State, and NC State had a walk-on playing quarterback for like the last 2 quarters of that game. So there are warts on the Florida State side as well. There are warts for each of these teams that we're playing, and so there's an opportunity here for Napier to turn it around, for Florida to be more consistent, and that's really what it is. They don't need to be like, they can be great in spurts. They actually showed us that they can be great in spurts. They just can't be great. They have not been great for more than like a 6 or 7 minute period in any game that they've had so far. And until that changes, they're going to continue to struggle. But yeah, like you said, I mean, Bill Sykes, our buddy, he's always talking about basically the year after the Florida State game. Almost always the team that wins that game ends up recruiting at a higher level. It's not necessarily the 2023 class where that's critical, but 2024 class is where that Florida State game in 2022 starts to really play a role. And, that is important. So from the standpoint of just owning the state, being able to have bragging rights in the state, being able to, considering the recruiting rivalry that's burgeoning there between Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal down south, really sort of putting your boot on the neck of Florida State and Mike Norvell and making sure that they don't get anything going, I think might be important. So, again, 2-2 I think is critical, but I think a win over Vanderbilt and a win over Florida State and toss-ups in those other two. The only problem is those other two come before Vanderbilt and Florida State. So if you're 4-6 staring down Vanderbilt, it's going to be a rough couple of weeks there in Gainesville for Billy Napier.
All right, I did ask the fan base, Will, what will Florida's record be? This was on Twitter. What will Florida's record be the rest of the season and why? 6,000 votes, Will. 2-2. Takes it away with 37% of the vote. 29% say 3-1. 21% say 4-0. 13% say 1-3 or 0-4. So 2-2, pretty much taking it right there. Most of the fan base thinking the Gators will finish 2-2. Did get some remarks here from some people. Dustin, Defenestrator 19 says completely depends on the AR we get and the defense we get. If we can consistently get the second half AR from the Georgia game and the defense who can get off the field on third down and a couple of turnovers, then I'll optimistically say 3-1. Kevin Reed says, I thought this year was a 7-5, 6 or 6 year. Hasn't been on the job a full year. Losses are number 1, 3, 14, 19. Top 10 recruiting class playing hard. That's all you can expect right now with a limited roster with zero depth. Gators 21, 387 Steve, 21387 Steve. At the moment, looks more and more beatable every week. The way the team went up to Knoxville and dealt with the crowd gives me more confidence about it. 3-1, definitely in the realm of possibility. Tarpon 21, this is the most important 4-game stretch for Billy and this team. We have to see a strong close and improvement down the stretch. Tennessee closed. There you go, Will, kind of going to your point earlier. Tennessee closed strong last season, which helped them have continued success into this season. Can be similar for Florida. MJ Smith at No Tread Zone 14 says 2-2 or 1-3. Haven't won on the road all year. Well, only played one true road game. That's at Tennessee so far. So haven't played many road games there for the Gators. Dropped 2 at home. You know, hopefully will. I know we alluded to it at the Tennessee game. Maybe playing true road game kind of opens up the eyes of this team a little bit. Get them kind of out of the comfort zone. But it does say if we get Texas A&M, I'll believe 3-1 more. Ralph Siegeben, just difficult to believe in this team. They play hard, but there's no leadership and no depth. They'll be competitive, but I can only foresee a win over Vanderbilt at the moment. Frankie Serrano, Frank Gator 627. This is the easiest third of our schedule on paper. We went 4-4 through the harder 2 parts, so I'll say 3-1, but possibly 2-2. We could go 4-0 or 0-4 though, to be honest. Elite Wideout Academy, we will find a way to drop one to one of those teams, hopefully not Florida State. Texas A&M is a team I think we will drop 1 to. I do think that if we stay aggressive on offense, then the sky's the limit. We have to score basically on every possession because our defense is inconsistent. A couple more here. Remy Intriago tempted to say 4-0 if I trust Billy that the way the team responded in the second half yesterday was a turning point. Given we've seen no improvement from week to week this entire season, I'm praying for 2-2. Don't make floundering A&M look like Super Bowl champs. That is a worry there. Brian Rogers, 1-3. Been terrible all year. Worst defense in modern Florida football history. Most inconsistent offense in the country. Won't be playing for anything, and pride doesn't do it for these kids these days. Probably beat Vanderbilt because, come on, but A&M, FSU are better. South Carolina has better culture. Whew, pretty critical there. Hal, Rocketman Hal says, I'll be super pumped with 3-1. Happy with 2-2. All the teams are mid, but so are we. So anything could happen. So, that's pretty much it, Will. All these teams, as we kind of said, are all kind of grouped together some way, some form or fashion. When you took a look at those stats I threw up there, I'll put that on Twitter too. If you listen to the podcast version, you need to kind of reference it there. But if you watch the YouTube version, have those stats right in front of you there for a few minutes. And yeah, Will, it's just it is tough to predict what this Gator team is going to look like through these next 4 games. And we just kind of discussed it there, but it really is. It really is. Florida can go 4-0, 3-1, 2-2, 1-3, 0-4. It is all on the table.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger things is, does it really matter? I mean, right? If you get the 2-2 and you get to the bowl game, I think that ends up mattering in some respects. But this is a build. We know it's a build. And last year, Florida's team went 6-7, but I think you looked at the underlying statistics. You said, "God, this team probably should have been better." This year's team, I look at the underlying statistics and I go, "No, they're pretty much exactly where they should be based on what they're doing." And so that to me, I mean, we said this under McElwain, especially. I remember us saying over and over and over again, we just want to see progress. And so that, I think, is what we hopefully start to like. That should be the expectation going into these last 4 games. This team is not going to come out and look like they can beat Georgia 3 weeks from now. But can this
Correct.
team go out and put together a good first quarter, a good second quarter, a good third quarter, and a good fourth quarter? Not great. Right. I don't think they need to be great, but can they just do something where they play an effective 4-quarter game the entire time? That's progress. Can they go out and play, put their foot on the throat of a team that's close? Like against USF, they had an opportunity to put them away and they didn't do it. If they get that opportunity against Vanderbilt, will they be able to do it? And against a team like Florida State, where obviously the juices are going to be running high because these guys know each other, they've played against each other. Are they going to be able to keep their emotions in check? And are they going to be able to go out and hit Florida State in the mouth? And really be the SEC bully on the block? Those are the things you're starting to hopefully get some answers on as you move forward. But, like you said, we're not going to be able to predict it till we see it. This team has been so inconsistent. I mean, we see them play like a team that has a shot to win the national championship against Utah. And then the next week just lay a complete egg against Kentucky. And, you see them play a game where they were competing pretty well with Tennessee. And Tennessee's just blown everybody out of the water since that game against Florida. I mean, that game, other than the Alabama game, that game against Florida was really Tennessee's closest call. And, so you play that way, and then you come out against Georgia and you just look listless for the first quarter and a half. And so those are the things I think, again, looking for progress, but looking for consistency. And even if that means that the highs aren't quite as high, can you bring the lows up to where the lows aren't quite as low, just so that it's a little bit more of an even ride within, like, not even just within a game, within a half? And, are they going to be able to do that? I don't know. But that might be the story of the season, right? Is it might be when Anthony Richardson's able to hit big plays, Florida's able to score, and Florida's able to win. And when Anthony Richardson can't hit big plays, well, then they struggle because the defense can't stop anybody. That might just end up being the entire narrative for 2022. And, we'll be talking all offseason about, can the defense improve from 124th or whatever it ends up being at the end of the year. And, it'll give us plenty to talk about then too, I'm sure.
Yeah, complimentary football is what I want to see. Hey, the defense finally gets a stop. Go out there and score. You had a chance versus Georgia. Don't get me wrong. You probably weren't going to win the game anyway, but you got them off the field in the first drive. You had a chance to put them down 7-0, and you go 3-0. So, but the schedule is that if you get in that situation again, let's go. Go out there and play some complimentary football. You finally get a stop. You finally get some turnovers. Go out there and offensive respond. And build a lead. And they did that in the third quarter, of course, but they had the chance in the first half versus Georgia as well. So, not the best opponent to gauge this Gator team on, but if you're in the same situation now coming up in these next 4 games, as I said, I want to see some complimentary football, and we'll kind of go into your point. If there's a chance, if there's a chance to go up by a couple scores, go up by a couple scores. If you're up a couple scores and you had a chance to put the game away, go put the game away. So all that consistency is progress, Will, and that's probably the best way to put it for this Gator team right now. Consistency will be progress, and will lead to some victories for the Gators as the season comes to a close the last month.
Yeah, man. Hey, I say this every year, and I mean it. We only get 12, and so we got 4 left. And irrespective of whether this team frustrates me to no end, and irrespective of whether there are things I'm concerned about when I look at the recruiting profile and I look at what's going on in the field and all those sorts of things, there's something special about this university to me and to my family and to the people that I spend time with. And so, enjoy this, right? Enjoy the fact that there's an opportunity to watch these games and see the team develop, because I mean, I've said this before, and, Georgia fans are going to experience this, is that they talk about being the hunter. They're not. They're the hunted right now, and everybody wants to take them down. And that got exhausting for Florida. I mean, if you can remember sort of the slog, especially in 2009 for that Florida team, where it just didn't feel like there was any joy associated with it or anything like that. And if you don't enjoy this part of it, where you're building up to that, then you never have any joy watching it because, the championship comes and goes, but you didn't enjoy any of the climb up to that point. And then it's just a question of, can you stay at the mountain? And that doesn't seem like a very useful thing either. And so, we know how sparing those moments are, those highs are. So you got to sort of wallow in the dirt here when things are going bad to make sure you appreciate it when those highs come around. And they're going to come around again. I mean, this isn't Auburn, right? Where Alabama, the behemoth Alabama, sitting there, where, Alabama's always been the big program in that state. And Nick Saban's only further accentuated that, right? And now Auburn's going through head coaches like Pez dispensers, and just, they're already paying Malzahn something like $25 million to go away. Now they're paying Harsin $17 million to go away. Like, we're not Auburn from that standpoint. It's going to come back around. Florida's going to have an opportunity to be good again. And in many ways, this is the joy, right? That going through this, that going week to week and sort of dealing with the frustrations and watching the build and all that stuff is what makes it worthwhile when you finally get to the mountaintop. And like I said, I think Florida's going to get there eventually. And when they do, it'll be sweeter because of these types of seasons where you've been frustrated, and then you can appreciate the ones where Florida goes out there and gets the job done.
Yep. Good conversation, Will, here. And I know we're all looking forward to see what these Gators hold this next month, and hopefully we're talking about a lot more. I am tired of talking about the losses on here now, so I do want to talk about some victories here for the next month or so. So, of course, big games coming up there for the Gators this last month. Good conversation going on the YouTube chat as well. Everybody thanks. I know that's been pretty active this episode as well. Everybody in there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet. We'll quickly Texas A&M preview this week, and I know Lisa, you and Nick have been Nick was kind of having a project where he was keeping up with different stats throughout the year.
Yeah. So Nick's got his weekly article, Newton's Notes. It's a little bit it's modeled after some of the old school ESPN articles that sort of took a look around college football, but he's obviously Florida Central or Florida focused when he's looking at that. All of an A&M preview. And then I'm writing something about NIL. A lot of people, when I wrote about Cormani McClain last week, said, the big argument was NIL has changed the game. And so I wanted to take a look at that and look at how NIL has changed that game. May not be out this week. We'll see. But I think I've got some interesting stats when it comes to that, and maybe some insight in terms of why some teams have been successful and some others haven't for that.
All right, there you go. Readandreaction.com on YouTube. Read and Reaction as well. So for Will Miles, I am David Waters, host of Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.